All right, everybody, welcome back to another session of D&I Chats with Luis. Today, I have a very special guest. I'm very excited. I've taken a couple of her workshops now, and the topic at hand today is going to be intimacy on stage, specifically intimacy with improv, even more specifically, intimacy with short form improv, like we do at Comedy Sports. Let's go ahead and jump right into it. Let me introduce Jessica Steinrock. She is the CEO of Intimacy Directors and Coordinators, and she is also a certified intimacy director for both film and theater, and she is also an improviser herself. Hi, Jessica.
Hi. Thanks so much for that. It's really cool to be here. A lot of times when people ask me like how I came by intimacy work, like I like to share the fact that I've identified as an improviser for a while, as well as I dabbled a little bit in stand-up comedy, long form and short form improv. But ultimately, I kind of pivoted away from the professional comedy landscape because I had some really negative experiences right off the bat. But at the same time, I love improv. I love comedy. And so while I don't do it as much professionally anymore, I feel like all of the skills that I've learned and all of the cool cultural environments that I've been in have really influenced my ability to think about intimacy work. And so that's what has allowed me back into the improv world, to think about how we navigate consent and boundaries and intimacy in non-scripted theater settings, because it's just so complicated compared to scripted theater settings.
Oh,
So
most
thanks for
definitely.
having me.
Tell you what, before we dive in deep, let's take a step back for those folks who aren't too familiar with what intimacy work is about. And maybe you can just give us the Cliff's Notes version of how you would explain this to someone who was maybe never heard of it before.
Yeah, absolutely. Intimacy direction, specifically for live performance, is a newly developing discipline that essentially treats scenes of intimacy as something that needs extra attention and special care. So, this person is fluid in concepts of consent, boundaries negotiations, choreography, and so they help facilitate scenes of intimacy in the same way a stunt coordinator or a fight director might facilitate a scene of violence or extreme stunt, right? So we take a high risk situation, we add an expert to help facilitate all of the parties so that everyone stays safe. And the big shift here is that we're valuing emotional safety and emotional boundaries as well as physical safety and physical boundaries. It's equally important. So we're making sure that everyone feels really supported and really safe so that when we do a scene of intimacy, we have support.
How long would you say this industry has been around? Because I myself I've been working as a performer and improviser for at least 20 years. And I would say that it's probably only within the last few years that I even started hearing about intimacy work, let alone intimacy with an improv.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, people have been staging intimacy uh, for forever, right? With varying degrees of success and varying techniques, right? So it's kind of hard to trace back exactly where intimacy direction started. But what we really start to see is like all of the topics coming together around 2006, where a woman named Tonya Sina published her master's thesis for Virginia Commonwealth University. And this is kind of one of the first documented ways where someone is trying to codify intimacy into its own specialty. Because before, a lot of people were doing intimacy as directors or as actors or as a movement coach. And so it was really in 2006 where we start to see this new position forming. But then we see a really big shift in 2016, 2017, when the Me Too movement went viral,
Right.
where we see the Time's Up movement, where we've got Harvey Weinstein happening, and a lot of these conversations about power, sexual harassment, what sexual harassment looks like in the industry. That's really where people started to turn to intimacy direction, right, which had a longer history of being built. So we already had a good foundation, but we see this role really skyrocketing
Yeah.
that 2016, 2017. And HBO picked it up. And they made a commitment to have intimacy coordinators on all of their sets in 2017, and pretty much from there on, it's becoming a much more widespread practice.
So at which point did you turn your attention to improv? Because obviously the big difference being with intimacy direction with scripted material, there's a piece of the script that will be repeated. Let's say it's a play, it will be repeated every night. So you know where it will happen and you know the moves, the choreography that will take place during that scene.
Yeah.
But obviously with an improv, we're making it up on the spot. You know, we're just kind of flying by the seat of our pants. So where did you connect the two in your head?
Yeah, for me specifically, I was doing improv in college with a number of really amazing people, some of which who have gone on to do some incredible work in Chicago, Los Angeles, and New York. I'm super proud of them. Uh, but After college, as I was kind of still exploring what comedy was, I started asking myself some questions about what were my own boundaries and how could I communicate those boundaries in an improvised scene, and thinking through some of those experiences, like I kind of alluded to before, where I didn't feel really safe on stage, where I felt maybe that my body was being used as a joke, or I'm fairly small in stature, so I got
Mm-hmm.
lifted a lot. Right, like there was jokes about my gender. We see a lot of these things happening, and for me too, like I carry my body leads to certain things, but I saw these things happening with other people, right? So we see a lot of other ways that people felt unsafe, or maybe their body was being used in a way that they didn't want to be. And then I was specifically thinking about, why do we think things are funny? And how some jokes made me feel really empowered, and some jokes made me feel not empowered. And so I actually went to grad school and got my master's degree in theater, and that was my like core question, was looking at, what does consent in improv, what does that even look like? How do we navigate that? And it was while answering that question that I actually met Tony Asina. And so it was really through improv that I connected to intimacy. And then I was able to kind of use some of the tools we were developing for this scripted intimacy work and bring them back, to say, okay, well, how do we empower people? How do we make jokes that always feel really good? How do we stay critical about what our comedy, what kind of comedy we're producing? How do we stay critical about the care that we give each other, right? We talk all the time about listening, about connecting, about teamwork. And part of that also is radical care for one another. And so finding ways to really make sure that that all of the voices are being lifted and empowered in that space.
Okay, well, yeah, wow. Okay. So what would you say were some of the, like, within the world of improv, some of the, like, first big issues that you started seeing? Because when I arrived here in Chicago was around the same time that 2016, the Me Too movement was at the height of what was going on at the time, and I was coming from Los Angeles, so a fairly liberal city, but I played a certain way for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
And then I landed here and all of this was going on, and all of a sudden I was looking at the way I played, and I was just kind of like, uh oh. It's just like a lot of past behavior started coming up, and you start questioning a lot of. I guess for me, it wasn't that idea of like, well, no one told me, but it was the thing that it's just not talked about.
Yeah.
And so looking back at it now, there are definitely a lot of moments that I'm just like, oh God, Luis. Uh, so for you, I guess, what were those things that you were seeing that eventually made you create workshops and start being an advocate for this?
Yeah, I mean, something that you just kind of said sparked. There's a term that I really love that I read about in an article by Sophie Hennecum and Dawn Bennett, in case anyone wants to look that up. But they talk about why sexual harassment is more prevalent in the creative industries than in a lot of other industries. And they have a study that talks about dance, theater, film, architecture, art, right? So it's a lot like all of the creative industries. And part of that is this thing called learned industry culture, where when you enter into a space, you assimilate to whatever the culture is. And our creative industries have really strong definitions of what's okay or what's not, right? There was a major culture for me when I entered in some spaces of like, if you can't take the joke, you shouldn't be a comedian, right? You have to always be able to take the joke, or you have to be up for anything. Or we even talk about yes and as a mentality that says you have to agree to whatever anyone wants to do with you. You have to be up for whatever anyone wants to throw at you. You have to say yes to no matter what, because that's what makes you a really collaborative player. And I think that has been manipulated into some like not great ways, and we can
Yeah.
still kind of find the heart of yes and really use it. But I think that that's part of what you're saying is we don't talk about the other side because there's an element of, well, this is the culture and it will always be this way and it always has been this way, as opposed to a culture being something that we have agency to shift and change and shape.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that idea of yes and. In the time that I have been in my position, I noticed that these tropes that we throw around our theaters, the, yes and it's like a family and all that stuff, like those become dangerous in moments where someone is trying to speak up. And so all of a sudden it becomes that, well, that's not very yes and like, why would you talk against family? And it's just like, I think we can we have a tendency to negatively lean on those ideas as opposed to finding a way to use them in those positive ways that we supposedly talk about and teach in the classes.
Yeah. I mean, there's also like this fear of herd mentality, right? Like we have the herd, and if you say no, or if you say actually I need this accommodation, or hey, this would help me do my best work, as if we stopped for a second and talked through what kind of contact we feel capable of today, right? That puts you outside, and in ancient times the sheep outside the herd gets eaten. And so we want to be part of the team. We want to feel included. We want to feel not outside, right? And I think that there are ways to say, hey, by speaking up, by advocating for yourself, that actually lets us know what can be done. Something I talk about a lot is that yes only has meaning if no is an option, right? Or that yes means nothing unless no is an option. So when we talk about like you always have to say yes, it kind of becomes a little meaningless, because now I don't know if you actually mean your yes or if you just feel
You're
really
just
pressured
following the
to say.
rule.
Right. And so like we create some space for no, or we create some space for yes if, no but, yes but. And that's between people. So we can say yes to the ideas, but we might have to shift the actions we engage in.
And when you say shift those actions, what sort of actions are we talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of in my head just now thinking about on stage sometimes, right, where someone might say, "Oh, I want to kiss you," right, or the character goes in for a kiss, and to say yes to that idea. So yes, absolutely, I see and hear and believe that your character wants to give me a kiss. Me, the actor, or me, the improviser, does
Mm-hmm.
not
Does
want
not.
to touch my lips to yours, right? So let's pivot. Let's say yes to the intention, right? Thank you for that gift of your character's intention. And I'm also going to pivot and offer some new information about the cold sore on my lip, or cold sore on the character's lip, or whatever, right? And so we can kind of world build, still say that yes but recognize that improvisers can communicate with more than just the word yes.
And so when we talk about that word no and finding a way to, I guess, empower the word no on stage, what sort of advice would you give someone who's kind of in those moments? 'Cause I've been in situations where I've heard people say, I just didn't know what to do in that moment. And so, you have that weapon of no in your arsenal, but for the most part, we're kind of told not to use it.
Yeah.
So, how would you empower someone to something like that?
Oh, this is a great question, because no is not only super hard to say, it's super hard to hear, right? Because when we hear no, we get defensive, it hurts. We're like, oh, I didn't mean to. You didn't think I just wanted to, right? And so it can be really difficult for both parties. Um, And something I like to think about, and I talk about this in some of my exercises that I do in person, but a lot of us know that game of whoosh,
Hmm.
right? Where we kind of pass the whoosh around a
Yes.
circle, or we can change the direction of the whoosh with a whoa back or a whoa or whatever people's words are for how they play the
There
game.
are 5 improv games and a million variations.
Right, but so we see this, and I like to liken that game to this idea of yes and no, and that a lot of times we think about yes meaning go and no meaning stop, right? But if we only ever have yes, all we get is a whoosh that goes around in one circle. By adding a whoa, we don't actually stop it, but we change the direction,
That's a
right?
great way of thinking about it. Yeah.
No is still a way that we can add directionality to it. We're just changing direction. And by adding no or whoa, right, we get now patterns that play across. So we can have it bounce back and forth here, and then it goes around the circle and bounces back and forth here. And then maybe it does a big arc, right? But so we can start to play around with the directionality of these words of yes and no.
So essentially, we need to stop thinking of the word no as a stop sign and more as just a detour.
Yeah, or a new gift. And I mean, and here's the other little gem about the whoosh and whoa is that it's always easier to say whoa, right? Like you could play the whoosh game with yes and no would still be just as hard to say. But when we have words like whoa or like no but or how about if we do this instead or um, maybe not today, and I was thinking about this, right? So there are other ways to say a no without actually using the word no. So, like, I tend to invite people to explore what feels good to you to say, right? And so maybe we practice and we build up. And then after, we've been working on ourselves for a while, we can just go no, like, thank you and no, right? But that takes time and that takes practice. So start with something that does feel easy to say, something that says, maybe tomorrow, how about we do this today? No, no thank you. Um, right. So there are other ways we
Yeah.
can make variations on that word no that gets the point across, but makes everybody feel a little bit more at ease.
It's so interesting that we really approach it with such a negative view when we had just a harder time with yes in the beginning.
Yeah.
Those level ones, congratulations on your purchase of improv sort of classes where it really is just like they drill the yes into you over and over. But I guess in my mind, it just became this thing of like, yeah, those are the set rules so that essentially like I learned how to drive by following the rules, but now I don't think tend to and stop and gas and key like I don't seatbelt, mirror, like I don't think all that stuff. I just do it.
Yeah.
I think we marry ourselves to those rules a little too much. I think they're good jumping off points and obviously good foundations, but once you know what you're doing, you can play around with them, I guess, and flex the rule. But and the hard part is all the things you have to keep in your mind. Making sure everyone is comfortable, making sure you're not veering off into kind of punching down sort of humor. Like it is a balancing act on that stage. You play and
Yeah.
and it get in and keeping this stuff in mind is I don't want to say it's hard, it's just changing our mentality
Well,
because it's been taught the same way for so long.
but it's I mean I'll just pivot off of what you said because I love that, right? That like we start in a way that's hard where we have to say okay 10 and 2 key break lift break slowly, right? And so for consent it's going to start the same way, right? Or thinking about the ethical impact of our jokes, if that's a new thing and someone hasn't really thought about that before, right? Because a lot of times we learn what's funny by what gets laughs, and we don't think about it much more than that, or at least
I've
I
passed that
was
point.
really guilty of that one. That's I won't project, but that's was very very much a me thing where I was like, oh great, that gets laughs. I'm going to keep repeating that without thinking much more beyond it. And so this new skill of how we think more critically about ethical comedy, or how we think about people's boundaries, or remembering people's boundaries, because now I've got to keep all of the boundaries of all these people in my head, right? And that's going to be hard at first. You got to remember the key and the 10 and 2,
Yeah.
and we're going to mess up. We're totally going to mess up. but we have to stick with it and keep practicing. Otherwise, it's never going to become as normal or as comfortable as Yes and now feels to more experienced improvisers.
So, kind of funneling down into the conversation. So, we've talked about improv broadly, but let's kind of maybe focus more short form, game based, like comedy sports plays.
Yeah.
So, we always have our ref, we have the person who is hosting, two captains, the teams, announcer. And so, remind me, did you play comedy sports?
I didn't.
Okay.
I've been to. I love it. I love comedy sports, and I have some friends who played, but no, I have not.
Okay, but you're familiar with this.
I am.
We'll take it. Great. So you know the format. You've seen it. Um, I would love maybe just your kind of wide assessment of what you saw from afar, I guess. I know it's been a while, but and obviously, we're not on our stage right now, but just I guess your what thoughts you have had, because you did come in a couple of years ago and do a workshop for us, which is when I met you. I'd
Yeah.
been doing my research on intimacy. I'd done a class, and then I don't know how it happened, but someone, I think it was Gabby. Are you familiar with
Yeah,
Gabby?
yeah.
Yeah, Gabby. She was like, "You need to talk to Jessica," and I was like, "Well, okay." And here we are, two
Here we
years
are.
later, the best of friends. So, just your thoughts on the comedy sports way of improv.
Yeah, I mean, I love short form. It is fast. It is also really accessible to people, right? Long form is, I mean, near and dear to my heart. I was a long form improviser
I
predominantly,
played as well.
but it's a little harder sometimes for audiences to like get on board, and also like a good team is good and a bad team is not. Right? Or like the bad shows are pretty bad and the good shows are amazing, but the bad shows are not
Yeah.
great. Um, but I feel like there's something really cool about short form, and particularly comedy sports, that is super audience engaging, makes people feel really invited to participate, to be part of that world, to world build together, right? They're not just watching, they get to engage regularly. And I think that that is so cool for how we bring people into a space and create laughter together. I think that it's just really joyful. And what I also really love about short form is that we have an opportunity to really go in a lot of different directions, and we can try something bold without needing to incorporate it in for the rest of the rest of the show. Um, and it takes a lot of trust, though, right? When you have those shorter moments.
Those little bursts of improv, I guess.
Right. You have to have a lot of trust, though, because you can't just like do something and be like, it doesn't matter anymore. Right. We have to really build trust with those people. And I think trust is something that is more critical to improv than I've seen in any other art form. And I mean, like, it's important everywhere, but like you have to trust each other in improv world, right? You just can't build unless there's trust. But trust also doesn't happen immediately. It
Right.
takes time, it takes repetition, it takes repeatedly caring for one another, repeatedly checking in, it takes making mistakes and then repairing those mistakes in order for that trust to build. And so that's like when I think about what consent and what intimacy looks like in short form, it's a lot about trust, and that we can't make an assumption that everyone is going to be game for everything right off the bat until we've worked with them a couple times, until we've
Right.
had conversations and then built that trust. And then we know that if we make a mistake, we can repair it really quickly because we have that history behind us showing us that we can do it.
That trust is there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the questions that I've gotten the most throughout the years as an improviser is when I tell them, "Oh, I have rehearsal," which is always, "How do you rehearse improv?"
Tell me a joke.
Yeah, exactly. Like, oh, great. Um, so I guess thinking about that sort of thing is like that's what we're doing in rehearsal. It's not so much practicing our jokes as it is building the trust amongst the teammates, learning how each person plays, where people's thought process go to, and see if you can follow that way, or maybe even connect them to yours in a certain way or another. So it does become extremely important that rehearsal does happen, because it's not so much what games are we playing or what are we doing in rehearsal, but it's just being and working with each other. And and it, it, it uh I mean, it really does just kind of open your mind to the fact that there are so many improv shows that happen on the fly, uh, outside of like comedy sports stuff, where it's just like, oh, we got 20 minutes tonight, who wants to play? And all of a sudden you're on a team with people that you've never even talked to outside of these 20 minutes, and they're making choices about who you are and about what you're doing and your body. And yeah, it really kind of it opens your eyes to the dangers that could happen on stage if people aren't being careful.
Right. Well, and in that culture that we curate of yes and, where it's like, well, yeah, you can do it with anyone and you can play the exact same way with anyone, right? Everybody's this neutral body, and that doesn't work, right? When we have diverse players with diverse life experiences on stage, the same joke with two people is going to look very different with these two people, right? And that's really important to take into consideration, the context of who you're playing with, what their boundaries might be, do you know them, and being culturally competent, being gender competent, being all of these other ways of socially competent will allow you to build trust slowly. And so then we can have these jams, but we start in these jams where we're in a space of being more cautious than maybe we want to be as improvisers, because we
Yeah.
want to be wild and crazy and able to do these things, but you have to save some of that for people you've built trust with, and that in these spaces we can still play with the rules that we've established, but we might need to slow down a little bit. We might need to telegraph a move. We might need to, like, as characters, ask each other, can I pick you up?
Yeah.
And even demonstrate consent in those scenes. I think that that's a really cool option as well.
So since we're a stage show, you come in, you do your green room stuff,
Yeah.
5 minutes, you're on stage, show happens, we do a halftime, rest of the show, boom, show's over. At which point during that process should people kind of start locking in those ideas of awareness? So I guess, I mean, like, does it start when the lights hit the stage, or does it start when we hit the green room? Does it start, as soon as your foot is in the theater? Like, when do these things need to actually, like, I guess, when does our awareness need to become aware?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is all the time,
Yeah.
right? We could be practicing awareness everywhere. But something I always really recommend is checking in, right at the top. Go around in a circle. How's everyone feeling? Anything new we need to know today? And I talk a lot about how the the degree or the amount of check-in is inversely proportional to the trust we have as a team. So if we trust each other and we've been working together forever, this is a group of people that, right, we know each other really well. We see this a lot more in long form teams.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, great. Then you can go around and be like, you good, you good, you good, you good, cool, done, right? But if it's a group of people that might be coming together, or maybe we've got a larger team, and every so often, right, these people play together, then these people play together, then these people play together, then these people play together, we might need to take a little bit more time up at the top to go through and say, like, hey, maybe the group boundaries are, like, we're not going to grab anyone's genitals today, or we're not going to make any, right, I mean, you don't do a ton of blue humor, but
Well, it's all right. You can...
right, but we say, like, hey, we're going to avoid this kind of humor.
Yeah.
Or maybe a team is like, we're going to be real blue tonight. We need to know anyone's boundaries, or does, like, anyone have injuries? Anyone have spots on their body they don't want to be touched? And that could just be like, hey, avoid my neck today, thanks.
Right. You don't owe anybody an explanation as to why. If they say don't do it, just don't do it.
Right. And so checking in before, and even just doing a quick check-in in the middle, right? If there's that break, being like,
Hmm.
hey, how's everyone doing? Anyone need to bring anything into the space? Cool. Let's play. Right. And then even having a check-in at the end where we can say, hey, this joke, totally see what you wanted to do there. I invite you to think about how that might impact this community. And then we can talk critically about it. And you don't always have to take every piece of feedback either, right? You can be like, okay, cool. I understand that. And I'm going to stick with my joke. I think it's funny for these reasons. Like, you have every right to do that.
Right.
But you also have to recognize that it will impact some groups differently than others.
And maybe in those moments, I guess I would just go, if you are going to stick to that, like, all right, that is not a person to make those sort of jokes to.
Yeah.
And just leave it at that. Not everyone needs to love your jokes. Just remember, yeah, there were definitely, like, I remember back in my 20s when I had a lot more vibrato. Uh, there were definitely things that I would like, no, I'm gonna keep doing this. But I still remember, I was like, yeah, I'm gonna keep doing this, except to this person. I will not disrespect them in that way. They do not like it. They have made that clear.
Yeah. Right. You don't have to find a set of jokes that work for everyone
Right.
because there is no set of jokes that will work for everyone. But you do have to be aware of what environment you're in. And if someone said, hey, that hurts me when you say that, like, don't say it. Like, it's not that
That,
hard.
that there it is. Yeah. So then, as we, have progressed, and now everyone is, for the most part, online. How would you say this translates to the online world?
Yeah. Online is really tricky, right? Because I mean, one, there's a lag. We can't make eye contact. I am regularly checking myself out in this Zoom
Oh,
call.
me too.
That
I
is
always feel like I'm always looking off to the side because well, you're over here, but the camera's right there. This looks like I'm looking at you, but I'm just looking at a light.
right. Well, and so like that's how we can look like we're making eye contact, maybe. But we can't make that eye contact. So we're missing a ton of cues from one another about how we're feeling. You can't
Yeah,
tell that I'm wearing yoga pants, right? Like you can't like I put on my
me
business
too.
stuff, and that's it. I'm Zoom ready. Um, and so right, we have a lot of now new things to think about when we're thinking about what boundaries might exist. And we can have boundaries over what we want to show on camera, how we want to show it, right? I have curated this background, including the chicken, for this Zoom call, right? And I might take the chicken down for other Zoom calls that might not appreciate having a chicken in the background.
Thank you for the chicken.
You're welcome.
It is appreciated. I want you to know.
I
Thank you for making that thought process. You nailed it.
thank you.
That was actually the first thing when you came on. I actually went, look at that chicken.
Right? Like he's appreciated in some spaces, he's not appreciated in others. So right, we curate these things, or we think about these things, and I have boundaries about how I want to show myself on camera versus how I would be comfortable showing myself in person. I'm also going to have boundaries about what gestures I want to do that might be different than what gestures I want to do in person, and that's physical consent as well. But the same thing about our boundaries about what we want to talk about, what kind of jokes we want to make, what kind of art we want to create, that all stays the same whether we're working online or in person. So the online world just takes more conversation about what do we feel we need in order to do our best work. Especially too because now this is also like my personal space
Yeah.
versus in the theater I can let go of the things. I can only bring the parts of myself that I want to show. Um, but when I invite people into my home in this way, it's already much more personal. And it's also harder to disconnect because we lose out on this ability to go into a space and shift. Now I'm in improv mode. Great, got a show to do. I
Yeah.
know what, blah, blah, blah. Cool. I'm here. I leave the space. Maybe I have to get on the train. Maybe I have a walk. Maybe I get in my car. But that like decompression time is super important to some of us. And we lost that. So now when we're thinking about how do we maintain wellness, how do we maintain our own boundaries, how do we put on shows in the confines of our home, we have to take all of this stuff into consideration. Um, and knowing that for ourselves helps us be compassionate when others share their boundaries. I kind of rambled a little bit in that answer.
No, no, no. That was great. No, I was, as you were saying, I was just, again, as we were talking earlier, as you were saying, I was like, she's right. So no, yes, I completely get everything that you're saying, and I'm sure we could continue on for an extremely long time about this topic. But we are coming to the end of our time here. I hope that as we progress with these, you will come back because we would definitely love to hear from you again. I'm sure there are a ton of like websites and links and stuff you could kind of shoot people towards. So let's do this. We actually have a resource guide for our theater, and if you have a two, three, whatever links you want to shoot me, you can send those in an email. We'll throw them on our resource guide so that people have
Yeah.
some information towards this because I would love for people to know more. So yeah, any final thoughts that you would like to share with us before we go?
Um, I think we make the best art when we feel good about it. I think we make the best jokes when we feel empowered. And the way we can do that is through listening and through building trust. And sorry, my Slack notifications are going off in my final speech. But really, like, I think the more we take time to interrogate our own relationship to our own boundaries, and then advocate for ourselves, that allows us to be able to listen to others. So I would say, I think that's actually, no, I've got it. That's my final thought is interrogate your own stuff first, right? Don't think about other people and their boundaries until you know your boundaries. Figure out, because everyone's got them. You've got them. I promise you do. And once you realize where your boundaries are, it will help you understand where other people's boundaries are. So I invite everyone to do that kind of self-reflection work, because the more you advocate for yourself, the more other people will be able to advocate for themselves. And the more we do that, the more trust we can build together.
Oh, you yeah, you got there. It was good. Yeah, it's good. No, you did it. You did it. Yeah.
That's it.
You started and then just had to stop to tie your shoe, but then you nailed it. All right. Thank you so much for being here. We will see you again, and thank you all for watching. And we'll see you at the next one. And the next one
Thank
of
you so
these.
much for having me.
Of course.
Bye.